Okay, good morning, everybody. Those of you who are watching in, and all of those who are here in this Zoom meeting, I'd like to welcome you to the thesis defense of Estefanía González Berríos. Her thesis is a partial translation of Vivir en Caimito, by Fernando Picó. And I'd like to especially thank our readers, Professors Jane Ramírez and Alma Simounet Bey. First, we will begin with a presentation by Estefanía, and then we will proceed after that into a general discussion of this project. Particularly with the feedback from our readers, Professors Ramírez and Simounet Bey. Okay, thank you very much. Estefanía, are you ready to begin?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Well, good morning to everyone who's tuning in today. I'm excited to share with you my thesis project on Spanish to English translation of Vivir en Caimito by Fernando Picó. I'd like to thank my thesis advisor, Professor David Auerbach, and my readers, Professors Alma Simounet and Jane Ramírez, for taking time out of their busy schedule to participate in this thesis defense and provide some feedback for me. Today, I'll be sharing some insights into my translation process, the cultural and linguistic aspects that shape my approach, the reason why I chose to work with a book that chronicles the history of the place I call home, and reflecting on the impact of my understanding of Puerto Rican history and the art of translation. As you may know, Fernando Picó is a prolific figure in Puerto Rican history. Having studied at the Jesuit school, Colegio San Ignacio set the foundation for a life rooted in the greater good. Although initially having completed a PhD in medieval history from Johns Hopkins, he took a leap of faith when he was invited to teach students at Fordham University about Puerto Rican history. This eventually led him to return back to the island and teach history courses at the University of Puerto Rico for more than 40 years. He wrote several books about the history of Puerto Rico, and some of his most famous include Historia General de Puerto Rico, which has become a standard college-level history text, Libertad y Servidumbre, which is regarded by many academics as a masterpiece of historiography, and that chronicles the consequences of the coffee industry for day laborers and peasants in Utuado, much like Amargo Café. Another important book, La Guerra Después de la Guerra, which was translated into English by fellow program graduates Siki Arana and Sylvia Korwak, details the seditious activity happening in the countryside during the first year of the U.S. military occupation in Puerto Rico. And lastly, a children's book inspired by Caimito, La Peineta Colorada is a story about a girl named Vitita and Signa Rosa, who come together to aid a fugitive slave, and that won the 1987 Children's Literature Contest by Ediciones Huracán. Among his many accolades, he was named Humanist of the Year in 2004 by the Puerto Rican Endowment for the Humanities. He was designated Distinguished Professor at the University of Puerto Rico in 2010 and received the Frantz Fanon Lifetime Achievement Award in 2013 by the Caribbean Philosophical Association. Now, let's talk about the book. Vivir en Caimito was published in 1989 by Ediciones Huracán. There are only 2 editions of the book to date. It's a historiography book written in Spanish that has a total of 184 pages, with each chapter divided into subsections. The author aimed for a broad readership, including academics, activists, and anyone interested in Puerto Rican history, culture, and of course, Caimito. The book explores themes such as Puerto Rican identity, community development, resistance to the established norms, solidarity networks, often stemming from the author's own experience living in Caimito. After spending over a decade in the Jesuit seminary, the author gained insight into the social, economic, and political dynamics of the community, particularly its sense of self-sufficiency and resistance to change. The author also explores various aspects of this rural society, such as land tenure, labor systems, religious practices, and cultural traditions, shedding light on the complexities and struggles faced by its residents. The book depicts meticulous research, insightful analysis, and an empathetic portrayal of the population through the following format. Chapter 1 gives us some background on the development of the city of San Juan, the impact of the transatlantic trade and of slavery, the economy of Rio Piedras and San Juan. Chapter 2 truly captivated me, as it explored the intricate genealogy of the most prevalent surnames in Caimito. What made it particularly thrilling for me was to see all of the surnames I found during my research of my family tree. It was a moment of personal connection that added significance to my reading experience. Chapter 3 provides details about Caimito's own economy, the lack of slavery, the impact of the notorious Libreta del Jornalero system, and new emerging job markets during the 18th and 19th century. Chapter 4 explores how Caimito lacked any formal representation in the government, making way for its development in the absence of the state, and how rural areas were commonly viewed as synonyms of disorganization. I will be talking more about chapters 5, 6, and 7, which was my translation selection, on another slide, but in chapter 8, the author concludes that Caimito is slowly reclaiming its space and developed a sense of identity and solidarity that has enabled it to deal with most of its own problems. Also, the author added 2 additional sections for the reader. One is dedicated to common sayings heard around Caimito, and the other lists all of the comisarios de barrio during the 19th century. In terms of geography, Caimito used to be a part of the town of Rio Piedras until Rio Piedras became a part of San Juan in 1951. With a population of more than 19,000 people, according to the 2020 census, it is the second largest barrio in San Juan in terms of land and population density. Another fun fact about Caimito, it's that it's the only barrio in Puerto Rico to have its own flag, anthem, and flag day, the latter which was codified into law in 2020. This slide features 2 photographs taken in 1941 by Jack Delano as part of a photography collection for the Farm Security Administration, which depict life in Caimito. The image on the left shows a rural area, while the picture on the right can give you a glimpse on the life of its residents during that period. I'd like to point out that these are my great-great-grandparents, Enrique and Teresa. Now, what makes Vivir en Caimito a book that's so important that it deserves to be translated into English? For starters, translating this book would enhance its accessibility, allowing English-speaking readers or the diaspora to explore a variety of topics such as historical marginalization, social struggles, human experiences, and solidarity from a Puerto Rican perspective. Readers can also engage with the author's firsthand accounts and experiences of the residents to gain insight into the social issues and community development. This book also holds the potential to be an educational tool, offering valuable insights for students and researchers exploring cross-cultural understanding, Caribbean studies, community development, and socioeconomic commentary. And lastly, translating this book could foster dialogue and exchange of ideas across linguistic and cultural boundaries, enabling broader discussions on topics like identity, cultural heritage, social justice, community resilience, and historical processes, because it becomes a conduit for exploring the dynamic nature of language. The reason why I selected chapters 5 through 7 was to examine how solidarity and unity are portrayed in Caimito, a historically marginalized community and how these narratives continue to be relevant in modern times, but also as a way to preserve the author's legacy and foster understanding of these marginalized voices in Puerto Rico. With a total word count of 3,705 words, Chapter 5 explores themes such as solidarity, kinship, marriage, the role of grandmothers as heads of household and families, and the importance of godparents. With the most extensive word count coming in at 5,694 words, Chapter 6 explores some of the inherited mindsets still present in the community, such as machismo, poverty, child abuse, high dropout rates, and the transition from boyhood to manhood. Lastly, the most brief chapter, with 2,848 words, Chapter 7 sets out to explore the figure of Luis Muñoz Marín and his mythical role in politics, the lack of interest in politics from young people, some examples of abuse of power, and the creation of community groups. When I began translating excerpts of this book into English, I found several challenges along the way. From deciphering Puerto Rican Spanish to capturing the author's subtle nuances of style and register, every step of the translation process presented its own set of hurdles, which I've divided into three main categories. For the linguistic challenges, some of the most notable examples are idioms, legal and slang terms, syntax, register, and style. Likewise, the historical and social context of the book, the sources the author used, his formatting, cultural nuances, and regional dialects are some examples of extra-linguistic challenges. On a pragmatic level, the author's reliability, along with the power dynamics of translating a subaltern perspective, were some of the issues I encountered when I was translating testimonial literature, where the author uses interviews from people around the community to provide another perspective to his own regarding a variety of topics. In terms of register and style, I had trouble translating some of the excerpts from sources used by the author. For example, on this slide, we can observe how the Spanish syntax and grammar used by Bishop Tres Palacios in his announcement to the residents of Rio Piedras about a ban on festivities is very different from the type of Spanish we use today. In order to render this into English, like the example shown at the bottom, I needed to clarify the meaning and replace some of the archaic language used with their modern equivalents to improve readability. Also, I modified the sentence structure so it could flow smoothly while still maintaining the same formal tone. On this slide, we can see some of the specialized terms that were difficult to translate. The ones that stand out the most to me are comisario de barrio, which is a type of small-town mayor and has no official translation in English, as well as Junta de Vagos y Amancebados de Rio Piedras, which was a municipal body that was in charge of regulating and controlling the activities of people who were deemed to be vagrants or who would cohabitate prior to marriage. Additionally, other terms that were difficult to translate were specific to the Catholic Church, such as matrimonio canónico, curia episcopal, dispensa del impedimento de consanguinidad, and proclamas. On this other slide, we can observe some other common slang terms used by the author and the interviewees in the source text. One notable term here is compi, a word which could possibly be short for compadre or maybe even compinche, which leads me to another significant term, compay, which I decided to leave untranslated because of a lack of a better word in English. Plus, I wanted to maintain the authenticity of the source text and avoid the loss of meaning. It was important to have a term that the reader could be potentially familiar with. Similarly, hacer buche maintains a scholarly tone in the English phrase keeping silent because it emphasizes the intentional restraint from betraying someone. Here, you can see some of the formatting strategies I applied to my selection. Since I wasn't able to determine the formatting the publisher used initially, I reached out to the Centro de Investigaciones Históricas, which suggested the author might have used Turabian or Chicago style, which is commonly found in history works. So I chose to adhere to the guidelines outlined in the Chicago Manual of Style to ensure consistency throughout the pages, like using title case in all of the subheadings, and making sure all of the paragraphs were properly indented to enhance readability and organization. Also, I updated some existing footnotes for accuracy, while adding other footnotes to provide the reader with more context. The author relies heavily on anecdotes from people around the community to provide another portrayal of Caimito. As you know, testimonial literature is a literary genre that serves as witness to personal experiences. This type of storytelling connects us to the past, preserving aspects of our identity while sharing knowledge and wisdom. These stories often contain valuable lessons and insights for our society. And it also helps readers create narratives that reflect their community struggles and triumphs, contributing to the living memory of a place and helping shape its future narrative. I faced some limitations in expressing my creativity due to the need for faithfulness to the original transcription of the interview. For example, I needed to make sure that the interviews read on a much lower register than the rest of the scholarly text. This dilemma also becomes more complex when translating into dominant languages such as English, as it raises questions about conveying cultural nuances to the target audience, and the moral and ethical relationship between the author, the interviewee, and the translator as a mediator. Caimito has had its fair share of challenges, from historic marginalization to geographical exclusion, but the author highlights how there are also some contemporary issues that need to be resolved, such as the lack of community engagement, limited political interest from young people, high dropout rates, and limited entertainment opportunities. However, as our community gradually evolves into more of a city, we're witnessing other significant changes. While urban renewal brings some positive developments, such as better access to education, new job markets, more community organizations, and several entertainment options, it also poses new obstacles. The influx of wealthier residents has led to increased social inequality and displacement in Caimito. As we adapt to these changes, it's essential to address these emerging issues to ensure that the evolution of Caimito is inclusive and preserves our heritage. There's still so much to be translated about many aspects of Puerto Rican life, particularly those that happened between the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. Translating books such as Vivir en Caimito could explore how history intersects with issues of identity, race, gender, class, and gentrification within Puerto Rican society. Scholars could explore the transnational connections between Puerto Rican history, including making connections with other Caribbean islands, Latin American countries, the United States, and beyond. This research could also examine how Puerto Rican history has been shaped by global forces and how it's influenced broader historical developments. There could also be research on how the author's work contributes to collective memory, commemoration, and public discourse about Puerto Rican history and the empowerment of Puerto Rican voices. This could involve analyzing how historical narratives are constructed from different perspectives, contested, memorialized in museums, monuments, textbooks, and the creation of new community groups. Also, this translation could potentially introduce unique perspectives to English-speaking readers about the cultural, historical, and social context of Caimito that may not have been previously accessible. It also might shed light on certain aspects that were not adequately represented in the source text. Lastly, it could pave the way for the study of the author's portrayal as a trusted mediator between cultural barriers. I hope that my translation bridges the gap between English and Spanish audiences, allowing readers to experience the author's work in new light. I believe that my translation of this book not only preserves the author's legacy, but fosters dialogue and understanding between different literary traditions. Thank you once again for joining me in this journey.
Estefanía, I want to thank you very much for a beautiful presentation. Now I would like to turn the floor over to our readers, because I'm sure they have some questions to ask and maybe some comments to make. Do either one of you wish to go first? Alma, Jane?
Well, I can start, Jane, or you
Okay.
are the professional translator.
Okay.
Estefania, I would like to congratulate you. This is an excellent translation. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, let me tell you something. Let me just share with you so that you will understand my comments. Because of my age, I lived everything you were talking about. I lived through all these years. You know, I was a little girl, but I was aware of Luis Muñoz Marin's election as governor. So I was there with all, the bombas y platillos that the Popular Democratic Party had. So there were many.
You're muted, Alma.
There we go. Okay. I also want you to know that Dr. Picó was a historian. I come from a different perspective in linguistics, which is more anthropological, which means that I am an ethnographer. And so many of the things that Dr. Picó did in this community, it's what I do, or what I did for my doctoral dissertation, which is interviewing and being like a cultural mediator. Okay. So I understand very well what he was doing. We just have different titles. One is a historian, the other one is the linguist. But you will understand that I had a lot in common with the things that Dr. Picó was doing here in his work. So it's I find that this was not easy. As a linguist, it's easy for me to talk about all these things. But if you're translating, you're dealing with, like you were saying, different styles, especially the registers. I think I made a comment to Dr. Auerbach about this, which I found fascinating. Okay. And the members of the community, we have to think that they had very limited schooling. Okay. Even though they attended the public school system, but you have the narrator with a PhD, and then you have the interviewee, who were talking about life. So you did a wonderful job there. Okay. I also think that you made the right selection of chapters for this, because that's where the heavy stuff of the community is talked about, and you were right in doing that. Okay. I think it was excellent that you also made you went into an explanation of some of the historical terms, so that people who will read this in English will understand what's going on. Okay. I love the explanation of the libreta, for example. And you kept the name in Spanish. I mean, you could have said, a notebook or something, but it's not the same. It has a cultural charge that will be lost if you give it a name in English, for example. Okay. Now let's talk about what you wrote here, that the historian is a translator who becomes a cultural intermediary. Okay. In this case, you have to call him a historian because that's what Dr. Picó is, but we do the same thing in anthropology, in ethnography. Okay. We become intermediaries, and it's not easy because our mindset is in our culture. And here you're becoming an intermediary, like a medium in that sense, for the reader. Okay. Your translation of the idiomatic phrases were excellent. Excellent. I'm going to give you a copy because I'm not going through every little thing, you know how you're reading and you say, oh, maybe this other word, but I'm going to give that to you as,
Okay.
as an afterthought, okay? Yeah, so
Yeah.
you can see that, yeah. One of the things that you talk about in your translators note, you're talking about the local Republicans. And I want to share with you that my mother was a Republican. And they were referred to as los republicanos de García Méndez. Okay? Why? Because García Méndez was the guy in Mayagüez who led the Republicans, and they made sure that they were different from the state Republicans. So Professor Auerbach was right in letting you know that we had to clarify like this so that the reader in English would not confuse the group. Okay? And I think you call them statehood Republicans, which is fine. You can either add Puerto Rican statehood Republicans, that kind of thing. But I think statehood Republicans is fine. Okay. One of the things that you will see in some of my comments, and I would like to share this with you. I went through the change in which I was addressed as Don and Doña, okay, by my son's friends.
Okay.
And then as they grew up, the Don and the Doña disappeared. As a member of that culture and of that time, I would really, really prefer if you kept the Don and the Doña.
Okay.
Because Picó left it there because that was the time when he was doing his interviewing. I think that the reader in English should have a feeling for the culture. And the Don and the Doña is such an important aspect of the culture of that time, okay? Of when I was growing up. When I called my friends' mothers and father Don and Doña. And when I read this in English, Rosa, I said, no, Doña Rosa.
Doña.
And my mother was called Rosa. So I can't think of anybody else calling her Rosa, except Doña. I don't know whether you are following me or you agree with me, but it's like a request that I'm giving you as a Puerto Rican from that time who went through that change, because I'm a linguist. I was able to understand at the cognitive level the change. At the affective level, it's not that I felt better. It's just different.
You felt like there was something that was taken out, maybe something that was like that emotional tie that was taken out.
Yes, and as I was reading this in English, ay Dios mío, what happened to the Don and the Doña? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this. Yeah. And I wanted to comment on the term comisario de barrio. I don't know whether you are aware, but when Fidel Castro created his new Cuba, he wanted to make sure that there were no spies, spies from the other side. So he created his own spies, and he wanted to make sure that all the barrios everywhere in Cuba followed the communist dogma. Okay, so he created los comisarios de barrio. Okay,
Oh, I
and
see.
they were not really alcaldes. They were just people who were very close to the community and who were just members and would walk around and be the ears and the eyes for the government. So I don't know whether that idea, that conception of the term is what created this comisario, which I think we have comisario de barrios for the political parties. That's what I think we have now in Puerto Rico, los comisarios de barrio. Because I did have a relative who was a comisario de barrio, Yes. So it's not really like an alcalde, which is an official position. This is like, it is official, but it's like extra official. It's hard to explain because it's very cultural.
Yeah.
Okay, you follow me. Okay, but if you cannot find anything, I'm just giving you a little bit of more information if you want to include that in your explanation, but so that you understand, because it's hard if you're not coming from these cultures. What is this comisario de barrio doing? Yeah. Okay. Then I would like to just go now into your actual translation, if I may.
Yes.
As I said, I was gonna give this to you. I'm gonna give this to you because I have very good, excellent, everywhere. And I want you to enjoy that too, because it's part of this whole thing. On page 6, there's someone who is jealous of his wife because of a servant. And on page 6, in that quote, which says, because the husband is jealous, I just added of a male servant. Because when I read it, I thought it was a woman. And then
Okay.
when I'm looking at the original,
Yes.
es él, and then it explains why he would be jealous. You understand? Yeah. So
It does.
instead of just servant, a male servant. Yeah. Then on page 14, okay, just a comment. I realized that Dr. Picó kept talking about ethnic and racial. I want you to know that in both in history and especially in the social sciences, there's been like a feud about the terms ethnic and racial, and for some time it was like taboo to mention ethnic. Okay, I think you did the right thing in just keeping, because it was really racial. I'm on page 14, and you many times you mentioned instead of ethnic and racial, you just kept the term racial, and I think that was a very good decision. So I wanted to comment on that. Okay. The next thing, let's see, page 16. Yes, it's chapter 6, the beginning of chapter 6. It's the first paragraph, the third line. Dr. Picó, I think, used the word, he's talking about the mentalities.
Yes.
Okay, la mentalidad, which is ways of thinking. That's what it means, And yes, everything he says there is fine. Now, but he used the word in Spanish to explain these mentalities. And he says, like you wrote, the term mentalities refers to the collection of values, aspirations, and anxieties. Then you use the word that influence. And that reminded me of the big feud that happened in terms of what is the effect of language, the language that we speak, on the way we think. And for some time, at that time, when Dr. Picó was writing, it was that, well, language causes thought to be affected. Then people said, no, wait a minute, then we would not be able to translate, right? So you wrote the word that instead of, he used the word conforman. Conforman means that they make up attitudes. I just added there, think about the word instead of influence attitudes. At that time, they thought that shape attitudes. Just food for thought. Okay? At that time, yes. Okay. Then on page 17. No, I don't have anything to say. 17. Why did I put it down? No, sorry, page 18. Machismo. You're talking about machismo at the top. Okay. And I am in line 1, 2, 3, 4. He's talking about legislation, jurisprudence, but then you wrote down that machismo, that is wishful thinking to believe that media, academia, and the legal system, it's not really the legal system, it's the current legislation, and or the current legislation, legislative affairs, and jurisprudence. Because it's not the legal system, it's the jurisprudence. And when I say my son is a lawyer, so I was asking him, what this, and he said, no, I think that what Dr. Picó is referring to is the legal cases that have been decided and affect life today. That's what jurisprudence is talking about. Okay. It's on in the original, it's on page 12. Because I always made reference to that to make sure, okay? But that's what he says. He says it's not a legal system that he's referring to. It's the cases that have been decided. Okay? Because remember, in Puerto Rico, we use a Napoleonic system of law, which is different from the United States. So here they look at the cases that have been decided, okay, and how they affect. Okay.
Okay.
Then we have page 25. Okay, page 25. The second paragraph, you mentioned the word absenteeism. Absenteeism and desertion are two very different events. And in the original, nothing is mentioned about absenteeism. Nothing. That is a problem that we have now in 2024. But at that time, it was school desertion, deserción escolar. So, you know, I would eliminate that. You understand
yeah.
the word absenteeism because it's not in the original. Then in the paragraph that begins with there is an imminent boxing match. Have you heard of false cognates? False cognates.
Yes.
Okay. You know that these are words that are very similar to English. It came into English through, you know, French. So we have discusiones and discussions, but the meanings are different. So look at it again. If I say in Spanish, están discutiendo, that means that they're arguing.
Yeah.
They're discussing something, not necessarily arguing in English, right? So
Yeah.
just look at it again, okay, with that in mind.
Okay.
If you need any additional thinking about it, I'm here anytime. Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Sure, sure. Then on page 26 at the top, it's part of the interviewees talk about, I think, history. And in the second line, the interviewee says something about, that's all in the past. It's good to know about history. I don't know, it just provoked in me whether that person in that register you know, would say it's good to know about history. Oh, it's good to know about the past. I think instead of history, I would say it's good to know about the past.
Yeah,
Rather
lower
than it's good to know about lower the
lower
register.
a little bit more.
Yes, a little bit more. See.
Yes.
See. That to me that was the hardest for the translation because of the register. Sure. Yeah. Okay, that's page 26. Page 28 is a typo. It's a footnote at the bottom of page 28, and that whole page was an excellent translation. Okay, so the footnote has a little bit instead of the third line says it is necessary to further examine of attitude. It should be the attitude. So it's a little typo. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out to you. Okay, then on page 29. You were talking about this, that in the original is La Divina Majestad, but I guess it's just that register is so hard, you know, from that time, you know?
Yes.
And you put down Christ. Well, I guess if people read this in English, the divine majesty. I'm still thinking about it, whether I would keep the original or change it to Christ. Just think about it. No big deal. Okay.
I think that maybe even our Lord could potentially work in this case.
Probably. So
be
that
a little
it
bit more
keeps,
elevated.
it's more elevated than just Christ. You know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just
May I step in for just a moment here?
Anytime.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I also felt the same thing. I didn't feel like it was appropriate to change it to Christ because the bishop wrote Divine Majesty. And I would leave it there because it was written in 1798.
Exactly.
And we expect that sort of language from older texts. In fact, I kind of think we needed it because there's nothing in the text that says that this was written in 1798 to call the reader's attention, and not all readers look at footnotes.
Yes.
That's true. That's true.
So
Yeah.
I wish we could do something with the spelling to approximate what he did, but you can't.
No.
You really can't reproduce that in English. But yes, I think it's important to use his wording there.
Okay, yes, I
Okay,
agree.
thank you for your comments, Jane. Really appreciate it. You interrupt me anytime you want to. Okay. Okay. And then this is where all the dons and the doñas, I'm not going to stop at it, but let you know, I think it's in that paragraph that begins with, however, neither the bishop's warning. That's when he begins to talk about Don Germán.
Mhm.
But I told you, reflect on it. It's just, it's a very important thing for me as a person who lived at that time. Okay.
Yes.
And went through the experience. I want you to know how a member feels about it. That's all.
Okay.
Okay. But it's your decision as a translator. And in fact, I wrote down very good, excellent, excellent translation. You know. Okay, let's see. Now, so that was page 29. Yes, on page 31. At the bottom of the page, he is quoting someone called Kiki, right? Okay. Would Kiki say, I'd like to be well off?
No, he would not.
Okay. So I was thinking, my God, I have to go into these groups of working class kids who have no schooling or anything. What would they say, you know? And I really have no idea. I just put, I'd like to have it all. I just put
That's a
that, but
good
I don't
alternative.
know whether that reflects. I don't know whether Jane and David, who are native speakers of English, I'm not. You know, well, what these people say? They would say, I like to be well off.
Maybe just rich.
Just rich. Okay.
Like to be rich, yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I really have no idea what these guys say.
I like rich. That sounds like a good idea.
Filthy rich. But it doesn't, there are gradations, and between somebody who's well off is not the same as rich.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure what he's trying to communicate here, meaning, could he mean comfortable, or could he mean wealthy, or
Barbara?
Isn't that the section where the quote from Kiki ends up with y de todos?
Yeah, but what he's saying is, I'd like to be well off, have my own house, my own family, and take care of my mom. That's not wealthy, I mean, if what I would suggest, maybe I don't, maybe comfortable.
Yeah.
But I think that comfortable is really like have it all,
I'd like to have it all, yeah.
Okay,
I have to be up there, montao. I think there was a phrase in Spanish, montao. And montao, to me, means like really be up there and have everything,
Yeah, but
I don't
then
know.
if the rest of what he says doesn't really jive with that so much, so but I have it all. That's okay. I think that's okay. I would go with that.
You would go with that?
Is that the speech where he ends it up with y de todo?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
And that kind of says, yeah, I want everything.
I want everything, yeah.
He may not
I want to have it all.
thinking, yeah.
See.
And everything else. Yeah, I want to have, okay, I'd like to have it all. I want to have it all. Not even I'd like to. I want to have it all.
Thank you, professional translators, for correcting. But it's a good discussion in terms of getting that feeling of being able not to think about working to have money. I just want to have the money.
Yeah, I want to have it all. I want to have it all. I think
Okay.
that works. That's a good.
Okay.
Estefania, how do you feel about that?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
I like
important
it. Like considering in hindsight how Caimito has been one of the most poor areas of San
thing.
Juan,
See.
and which is funny enough, different from what we see today. Yes, there is still poverty in Caimito, but we have, you know, Montelledra, and we have all of these developments. These people are really, really rich. And I kind of see them comparing themselves to this new population that's coming into Caimito and settling in. So yeah, I think that have it. I want to have it all. I want to have what they have. I think it
Exactly.
works. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, then let's move to page 33, in which there's one of the interviewers talking about his son. That was beautiful. And in that, on page 33, that first piece of interview, he's talking about what he feels, you know. And the second line, he says, the first thing I do is check on him. Ask my wife, instead of how he is, how he's doing.
How he's doing.
I would say how he's doing. Yeah.
Yes, I like that.
Thank you, Jane. Because he's the thing. I don't know. How do you feel in English about saying he's the thing instead of saying he's what I love the most?
Yeah.
Yes, Jane, also?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like it. Not like, you know, it's actually a human being, not like property.
Like a thing.
Yeah,
Like a
I
thing.
think that would make much more sense in this case, like what he's talking about.
Okay, on page 34, we begin chapter 7, and again, el donceo, la doña sea.
Yes.
Okay, we go to page 35, and it's mostly the don. In that first big chunk of interview, on the third line, I believe that Don Donato was talking about Muñoz Marín, and now we talk about Muñoz Marín, but at that time we talked about Don Luis. At that time, it's like when Ferrer gets elected, he's Ferrer, but then people begin to call him Don Luis.
Don Luis, okay.
Yeah, you know, it's yes, Jane, you wanted to say something.
I was going to put that was going to be part of my, but we might as well discuss it when you're here.
Claro,
I agree very much with Alma, with Professor Simounet, that it should be, well, you're calling me Jane, so I'll be calling it too. I agree very much. And all right, I'm not Puerto Rican, but I've lived here since 1972.
Imagínate.
And I remember being called Doña.
Claro. Okay.
And I felt that very same one that Alma is talking about, Don Donato, I think it was, when he says Don Luis, there's both respect and affection there that you totally lose when you say Muñoz Marín.
Muñoz Marín. Thank you.
So if you don't put in any other dons or doñas any place, that one place,
that's my chance.
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's not that you're in a higher position. There's this social distance that existed at the time. But the social distance in this quote was like Jane or Professor Ramírez, going back and forth, says it's a combination of respect, but also of affection. Okay, remember, the man comes at a time when there's so much poverty. Okay, this was right after the end of World War II, Estefania. And I remember being a young girl at that time. Sometimes the ships with food would not arrive in Puerto Rico because there were German submarines. So, you know, there was a lot of fright and fear in the community. And these people come into power and affectionately treat us like, I'm going to be here for you. And so the whole public referred to him with affection. So you understand what Professor Ramírez is saying?
Yes.
You understand? Okay, fine. That's the most important thing, yes. This was page 35, where we're getting there. And okay, now one of the things that Don Donato says, he's talking about, let's see, it's line 1, 2, 3, 4. He's assembling los hombres. And at that time, it was los hombres. And my father was one of them. My father, in terms of following Muñoz Marín.
Yes.
You know, many years later, I'm talking about maybe 30 years later or 40, he says, Don Luis made all these promises, but you know how voters say they made all these promises, but nothing happened. So, but at that time, it was the men, because that was a society. My mother could not join. Of course, she would never join. She was a Republican, you know. So I lived throughout, you know, all these times. And I don't know, you changed, he first assembled the people. I think he first assembled the men. It's a cultural happening, okay? And at that time, women were not supposed to participate in this. I don't know how Professor Auerbach and Professor Ramírez feel about this. They will, I don't know, they will have their chance to speak about it, okay?
I think that the complexity here is that, you know, the kind of shifting of genres, you know, where we have to look at this as, you know, a historical document, that, but then it's also testimonial, but then it's also, you know, these, and so I think that it's a very, very complex thing when you're translating it, because you know, you're trying to use, or I'm trying to use, or Estefanía might be trying to use sensitive language, you know, sensitive and respectful language, and inclusive language as well. And then,
even though there was not inclusivity at the time.
Yes. I know. So that's the issue here. So, you know, all I'm saying is that you go through these shifts.
Yeah.
You know, where you have the formal text, and then you have the formal historiography, and then you have the testimonial. And when you get into the testimonial, then you have to sort of say, oh, okay, this really needs to reflect more verbatim what this person is saying, and try to get that into English. So I agree with you, but I understand why it happened.
I do too. I noticed that and decided not to make a comment about it because of that very problem of this is going to be chocante for modern day readers, the men. And yet now listening to David, I'm back where I started. That yes, it was the men. They made committees. Committees is not the word. I don't remember what it was, but it was in the text. But it was he gathered together men.
Yeah, and I think that it could also potentially give readers something, like if I use men, something they could go ahead and research, like why were they assembling men instead of women? What was happening with women at the time as well? So yeah, I think.
And, excuse me, but if I recall correctly, just like in the very next phrase, or at least in the next sentence, it does say people, and you said pueblo, so that does bring in the inclusion.
Yeah.
Right after that. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, that's a wonderful. Both interruptions have been wonderful. I love that. It's part of the discussion.
But I interrupted Estefanía.
But it's good for Estefanía so that she can, you know, understand the thinking behind it. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. And then of course at the bottom they're talking about Doña Sara Rosa. Good to know.
Yes.
And in the original, Dr. Picó talks about sus recelos. And then you took away that recelo aspect and just say she expressed herself. And I thought, you know, I had the feeling that she expressed her fears, because that's what she was talking about, sus recelos, you know, and I thought that was important. Okay. Then on page 36.
Can I just make a comment?
Claro.
Are you suggesting there when Fernando Picó refers to Sara that it should be Doña Sara there?
In the original, I believe it's Doña Sara.
Well, okay.
Okay.
The reason I'm saying is that I personally think it's fine in the testimonial parts to include the don or the doña,
But
But
not in the text,
but
even though
not-
Picó mentions
not in
it.
the Picó text.
Mhm.
Okay, I can see that.
Because look, the thing is that Fernando Picó, who has been translated, you know, I think that he's reflecting, you know, these social mores. He's, you know,
Yeah,
and everything else. But at the same time, he is trying to speak objectively as a historian. And so
trying to speak, yeah,
the
objectively, yeah.
objective part as a historian does not need to go into these emotional titles.
And cultural ties.
Yes,
Mhm.
I don't think he needs to. I think it's
Okay,
only testimonials, and that I
okay.
agree with. But
I agree with you, David. My only feeling that something that does accomplish of using the doña is he uses it with the older people
Yes,
Yes.
and not with the younger people.
exactly.
So that there's something there that gives us an indication of the age of the people. Maybe that can be accomplished in a different way,
no, I don't think
or
it's.
maybe it's not
I
important.
don't think it's necessary for the historical part. You know, for the historian part, the historiographical part. But for the testimonials, okay, I can see that. And it's the same as with a work of literature. You know, it's Don Quixote, you know, it's Dona Flor, you know, but when you're dealing with something that is a science, you know, or a humanistic science such as history, I don't think that it's really necessary to have the historian, his voice, to be doing that.
It's just that to me, he had the choice of calling her Sara, but he decided to call her Doña Sara, so I respected that, you know.
Okay. You know,
But I understand your thinking. I'm following you, David.
look, Estefanía, inevitably, it's up to you.
Claro, claro, I agree. And I hope that she translates the whole book, Estefanía. You need
Thank
to.
you.
You're wonderful. Yeah. Okay. On page 36 at the top again, line 3. While Black people endured, I don't think Doña Sara Rosa or Sara Rosa would have, I don't know, used the word endured. A lifetime of slavery, Black people were slaves, period, and that's it. You know, you yourself make the choice of bringing down that register.
The register a little bit more.
Yeah, because of the word endured, it's
too elevated.
It's too elevated, yeah.
Okay.
See. Okay, now it's page 36. Okay, on page 37, we're talking about the devil. That was fascinating. And in line 2, you say the devil is hardly mentioned. I have a feeling that the people were very categorical that the devil is never mentioned. No se menciona, you know? So that being that categorical with it, you know, I would,
I think, sorry about that.
No,
yes,
that's okay.
I think I agree with what you're saying. Because they were like so religious and they would come from Caimito, they would go down to Nuestra Señora del Pilar. So yes, I see what you're saying on this particular sentence.
Yeah. And I remember being a little girl and being told, aquí no se habla del diablo. Even in the midst of Santurce, not in Caimito.
Yeah.
Okay. So I got that. This is that. Sí, exacto. Mira que it's the fact to have a saying. If you mention him, will come. Insane. Mira, no menciones el diablo que viene.
Yeah, or maybe like no lo mencione, uno nunca sabe.
Yes, all these, yes, yeah, you know. Okay. Let's see, page 38. I'm trying. Oh, okay. it's again having to, it's on in the second paragraph in Puerto Rico. The third line, you said that the people, the elite who lead political parties are employed in academia. Again, not the judicial system. It's in litigation in the judicial system, because it's not the judicial. There are all kinds of people working there, so it's litigating there. And then instead of, the original says that the elite have igualas. I remember my husband, who was a lawyer, talking about igualas. Do you understand what an iguala is?
No.
No, okay. An iguala is a contract that you may have with a company. It can be an insurance company, it can be a government agency. So my son suggested having a fixed contract with government agencies.
Okay.
Because that
sense.
means that instead of getting money from individuals, when you have an iguala, you have fixed contract, fixed check coming into you. And that makes a difference. And that's what I think they were making reference to. Okay, and the rest is excellent, the rest of that paragraph, excellent, yeah. Let's see, page 39. No, I'll just let you read what, is written there. We're getting to the end. Page 41. Yes. I think it's the second paragraph that begins with initially. The committee used a residence. I think they rented a house or rented a residence, rented because
Casa is what it says.
Sí, exacto, sí. And I think we have to be very, very careful about that. And of course, page 42, up there, my brother turns to David and says, David, what if we use the land? No, what if we take over the land? Eso es invadir un terreno. And
It's squatting. It's squatting.
Excuse me?
It's squatting. It's squatters.
Squatting, okay.
Exacto. They just took over. So be careful. So it's all, many times, anytime that they use, no, they were taking over the land or squatting or whatever. See, then you say they were constructing the building, and then you think of a building like, here at the university, but it was really like a little, I don't know, what would you call it in English? It's not a ranch, like I say, un rancho. A ranch in English is something else. It's like a little house.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe a professor Ramírez.
When my Mexican husband used rancho, and he was talking about 4 poles and a roof.
Exacto. That's what a rancho is to me as a Puerto Rican.
Like a cancha bajo techo.
Una cancha bajo techo, but some of those canchas have electrical, well, all these different things.
A cabin?
It could be a cabin, but not a building. Okay, Estefanía, just think about it.
You could leave rancho and.
Porque construir un rancho.
But then you have to explain it.
Sí.
A simple building, maybe just putting in the word simple would help.
Next to the word rancho.
Sí, un rancho, and then in parentheses, she's talking about leaving rancho and then putting in parentheses like putting up 4 poles, like David was saying.
A simple building.
A dinghy, or something very simple. Yeah.
Okay.
My last comment is on page 42, and it comes because I remember talking to, all of you remember Andy Hurley, who and he was telling me that he read a translation in which someone wrote, but instead of ponerle un nombre, names of the building after so and so, that you put down to christen. And he says that's a very religious term. And even in Spanish, nosotros no decimos ya, vamos a bautizar ese edificio con este. That's like old time. No, that's even for me. Okay?
Yeah,
It's to name
to
the
name.
community center, yeah, rather than christen. Say. And that's it,
And
Estefanía.
while you're right there on the naming that, I liked what you did, Estefanía. You moved that down to the end of that paragraph.
Sí,
I lost my point for a little while, but it was appropriate to the meeting because you're just been
Exacto.
talking about the if the government sends somebody to be in charge, then he's going to be on the side of the government and not on our side.
Exactamente,
And
sí.
he didn't even manage to get the name,
Yeah.
the building named after David, or the
David,
organization named
sí.
after David.
Sí.
So it fit. I liked that you moved it. Ordinarily, I wish people would leave the structure alone, but that was a good one. I've got another one that I'm going to talk about.
In fact, I want to tell you, Estefanía, that for the first time in a translation thesis, I found that how you change the syntax and the structure of the whole paragraph. And you played, yeah, but the sense came out. It was there, the meaning. Okay. And I had a wonderful time reading this and say, well, let me look at the Spanish again. Is this what and you played around with it and it was a change. It was a change. It was easy reading. It was readable. It sounded more like English, than Spanish, and that's a good thing. So thank you for inviting me to your
Thank you for
committee.
coming. Yes.
And thank you, Professor Auerbach, for accepting this invitation that I received to be part of this committee. As you know, I love reading these translations because I love language, and I really enjoyed what you did with the word. So thank you very much.
No,
Thank you.
thank you very much, Alma. Jane, I'm sure you have some comments to make. Maybe adding to what Alma has said already, or going off on your own, if you don't mind.
We don't have a lot because Alma has covered quite a bit of that. I do want to say this about Alma Simounet. I worked with several directors of the English department while I've been teaching in undergrad there, and they've all been helpful. Every one of them has been good to me, but Alma's the one I could have translation conversations with. And that was always so much fun. I miss working with you, Alma. I really do.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much.
I know you've got a love for words in general, and you have a love for translation, so
I love it.
it's good. It's good having you here.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so yes, I had made a note of wanting to say something about Don and Doña, but it was very particularly with that one situation with the Don Luis. I really wanted that, so we talked about that already. Alma mentioned that she liked your footnote explaining what was it, the libreta, which I did. I made a note that I particularly appreciated your explanation of the promesas de reyes.
Yes, that was
it was well done. I liked your use of footnotes. You didn't overdo it. It's very easy to get into start putting in a whole bunch of translators' footnotes and get carried away. But I think you put them in where they were necessary and they were well done. Okay. I liked the book very much. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that it's currently not available on Amazon, I would have the book in front of me now. I'm always looking for interesting books that I can read, from which I can extract passages to use in my classes. And I especially enjoy those oral histories. I've done that before. I can be pretty passionate about oral histories, so we'll get into that a little bit. I felt like you did your best work in the chapter 5 and in chapter 7.
Mhm.
Chapter 5, I really appreciated the research. That's the one with all the statistics that starts out pretty dry with a lot of statistics. But
Yeah.
I never would have thought of contacting the National Archive. It's interesting that to have consulted them. And another thing I never would have thought of is now I moved to Puerto Rico in 1972. And Rio Piedras and I lived in Rio Piedras, in Caparrateras. It's so hard to say that in English when say Caparrateras in either one of the languages, because you have to lift your mouth to say it. Okay, I lived in Caparrateras. And people told me, oh, my first address said Caparrateras, Rio Piedras. And I said, wait, isn't this San Juan? And someone explained to me, well, Rio Piedras used to be different. And yeah, when Rio Piedras became a part of San Juan, I was 2 years old and living in northern Illinois. So
Mhm.
I knew nothing about it. But of course they would have to have, I never thought of it. The general archives would have had to reclassify documents from when you join one municipality to another. They would. How did you find that out?
I reached out to them directly to AGPR, and they provided me with several links, and one of them was the Fondo Municipal de Rio Piedras. So they went ahead and just divided that into its own little subsection, and it lists all of the information where I went ahead and updated the footnotes. I contacted the
Yes.
National Archives because since it's a book written in Spanish, I was like, well, I'm not sure. I think it could be in Chicago style, but I'm not really sure. I don't think it's MLA. So I went ahead and reached out to them. They said they weren't able to help me, but I went ahead and reached out to the Centro de Investigación Histórica. And yes, they confirmed that for me. So, but yes,
I noticed I would have simply, if it said caja número 110, I would have put box 110. I would have done that. Never thinking that it might have changed because from the time that he from the time at the time he wrote it, it was all the change had already come about, and yet he had the old
information.
Right, the old locations is what I was looking for of those.
Yes,
So-
and back at the time when this book was written, 1989, you know, it's very different from now. The Archivo General has moved to digitalizing several of its sources, which is what happened with this book. So that's why I went ahead and updated some of the footnotes, as well as when they mentioned the book of, I think it's the parish book. That's all on the internet as well. So, but yeah, I was going to mention, Jane, that even though Rio Piedras became a part of San Juan in 1951, I believe that my mom still has some envelopes. Like, for example, when my Social Security card came in the mail in 1992, it still says Rio Piedras. So,
Yes. And I have fairly recently, I've even seen envelopes addressed to something at Pato Rey, Puerto Rico. So it's not just Rio Piedras that happens with. So, okay. Well, anyway, moving on. So in chapter 5, I particularly appreciated the research. In chapter 7, that's where I felt the passion that you were expressing in your preface. I felt you did your best job of translating. You did well in all of it, of course. But in chapter 7, that's when I really felt the passion coming through, and I appreciated that a lot. Now I have a document to send you as well, with all of my comments, and there's dozens of comments. Don't let that scare you. That doesn't mean it's a bad translation. It means I spotted a lot of the things have to do with that. My comments a lot have to do with syntax. There's lack of parallel structure in a few situations, and I've pointed those out so that you can find them. Not only, but also as a special favorite of mine, and you got it right sometimes, which thrills me. And I've pointed that out. I've also I highlight things in turquoise when it's something that I particularly liked. So I should have marked a whole lot of things in turquoise, but I got busy marking the things in yellow that I'm commenting on.
Okay.
I don't want you to be hurt or shocked scared by the number of comments, but I do want you to look at all of those. Some of those you may choose not to follow, and some you will. I saw in your presentation, you talked about formatting, and one of the items was in proper indentation of all the paragraphs. You slipped up on that a few times.
Okay.
And I marked some of them I didn't, but usually you were quite good with in each section, not indenting the first paragraph, but then indenting all the subsequent paragraphs. But there's a few places where it also might have been a slip when in transmission of the documents. I've seen formatting go haywire when things are sent over email. But so anyhow, I've listed a lot of those. I have now to get into chapter 6. I have a general comment, and I'll just give 2 or 3 examples of each one so you can see what I'm talking about. I felt like that's the chapter with a lot of oral testimony. I felt like we lost a little something in the transmission of both the oral testimonies and Fernando Picó's writing. And I'll explain what I mean. You said in your preface that you wanted to make a difference between them, and to make a difference between his scholarly writing, his academic register. And yes, it's scholarly writing, and appropriately so. And yet you also mentioned at the beginning of your preface that that you thought it would be easy to translate this because it was very readable. I think you said the lightness in his style. And I agree with that. I'm not an expert on Picó, but this is not the first time I've read him, and I've noticed this before. He is a little informal sometimes. He makes it a little personal. And you took out some of those personal things. Like the first one I noticed was on page 10. I just made a note of the page. You don't necessarily have to go there. But he said, mi hipótesis es. And you took that out. You didn't put in you just, I don't remember what you wrote, but you just wrote a bland, generalized, it could be this or whatever. He said, this is my hypothesis. He wanted to say that. I would leave in that personal thing. Okay. And there was another place where this is in page 24 if anybody's taking notes, but all of this information is in. You don't have to take notes on what I'm telling you because it's all in what I'm going to send you. It's talking about the little boys coming from elementary school to junior high and how they have to prove themselves to their peers, sometimes with their fists. Picó, and this is him writing. This is not oral testimony. This is Picó writing, and he said, I don't remember what came right immediately before, but I know he said con los puños. And you translated it as sometimes
resorting to physical violence.
Resorting to physical violence. Why not just say sometimes with their fists. Because Picó wrote it that way. And I think in your desire to use a formal register, you took away some of his personal style and his personality. And I'd like to see some of that, go back. When he keeps it simpler, I'd like you to find the same language that he did, and that's the way he writes.
Yeah.
So anyway, and there was another one where this was on page 21 where
Can I ask a question? What do you think then about using contractions? Should contractions be used when he's discussing anything, for his voice?
probably not, because he didn't write any contractions in Spanish. Are there contractions in
There are
Spanish?
no contractions in
What
Spanish.
would lead me? I mean, I wouldn't be informal just to be informal. So no, I probably would not use contractions.
Okay,
Unless it sounded very stiff to not use the contraction.
No,
But when he himself is using a less formal term, like with their fists, why go to resorting to physical violence? Because for one thing, that even gives me another picture. I mean, these are just little kids, and because if I'm remembering correctly, it was not transition to high school; it was transition to middle school, to junior high, and their violence would be with the fist. But when you say resorting to physical violence, maybe there's hitting them with a baseball bat over the head.
Yeah, I agree. In hindsight, it does sound more aggressive than just their fists.
So it's not a big thing. It's just I want this to sound like Picó.
Okay.
Yeah. I have actually, what occurs to me is, thinking about this is also having read a long time ago, somebody who's really not that popular, I don't think anymore, and that's Oscar Lewis. Oscar Lewis, the anthropologist.
Yeah. I've read a lot of him.
Who, and I think he's not so popular anymore because he would overly personalize, sort of make an overly personal narrative from observations of an anthropological nature. And I'm just a little bit cautious about that. But of course, there's a big difference, because Oscar Lewis would be writing about, for example, lower income groups, communities in Mexico or other parts of Latin America, which, he was not born into that kind of society whatsoever. Although he came from very humble or relatively humble beginnings. But in this case, Picó is very much inside the community. He's very much inside the community. So it's not, it's not really, it shouldn't be entirely a cold distance. But I think it's very difficult to try to figure out what register for him, and because he's a scholar as well,
Yes.
And that's just a question I have in general. And also, if you have to make a difference between the two registers, sometimes it becomes really difficult, because if he's starting to seep into that informality, then it would seem very wrong to me to have the same tone, the same style, the same register for him as for the testimonials. It would seem odd, and it would also seem badly translated.
No, I don't know as I would see it as, I suppose it could be seen as badly translated if people don't know what was there.
Yeah, I guess so. But all I'm saying is that I think judgment has to be used, and
Well, of
maybe
course.
And I think maybe a couple of times, maybe my suggestions, or maybe Estefania's suggestions, or the way that she was translating, she might have gone a little bit too formal, or I might have said, go a little bit too formal, you know. So you can blame it on me in part.
Well, I certainly agree with your idea, with your plan, your premise of you need to make a difference between the two. So yes, maybe I'm handing you an impossible task, but I think I pointed out the specific ones where I felt were, in my opinion, and that's one of those things where you look at it and you decide.
Yeah.
This next one, I'm not quite so willing to let you look at it and you decide, because I feel more strongly about it on page 21. When it's talking about, I believe the section is about school desertion. And it says, when men abandon their education, and what's the next part? I have all these marked, but I would have to go look at the actual comment. Men abandon their education. No, I'm going to have to look at it, unless you've got it right there. Do you have it there, Estefanía, on page 21?
21, I have dropping out of school on page 24. Page 21.
I'm looking at 21 because I think.
Oh, I have a printed version. Sorry.
I have it on the screen, and all you have to do, if you have it on your screen, all you have to do is Control F and find it. Abandon their, what do you want the rest of that quote? Is that abandon their education or engage in criminal behavior?
Okay. When you say men, now I have to come back to the meeting. I had gone away to try to find my text, and now I can't find the meeting. Sorry. I'm not used to Zoom. And I'm not. Okay, I usually use Google Meet. Yes, okay. Men abandon their education and
or engage in criminal behavior.
Or engage in criminal activity. Now, when I read that, I picture a young man in his 20s who's maybe decides not to go to college or drops out of college and gets involved in, I don't know, stealing cars for a chop shop or dealing drugs and so forth. But this is teenagers, and it's talking about high school. I would write boys drop out of school, and then the literal translation of what was in the source text is, and get in trouble with the law.
Okay.
And that gives a very different picture. And I presume that you did that because of wanting to have to upgrade the register.
Yes.
From getting in trouble with the law. This is one where I feel like it really needs to be a more literal translation of what's there.
Yeah, it's starting to sound more like Oscar Lewis.
Okay, I'm sorry. I read Oscar Lewis because it was assigned to me to read it, and not because he was necessarily my favorite, but I do see your point. I remember it.
Very influential for me as a kid. As a kid, it was very influential for me, but I know that it was highly criticized.
Well, at the very least, I think it's talking about boys. It's talking about teenagers. Yeah. It's boys, not men. Men made me think of in their 20s. I'll back off on the others if you and David feel like it needs to be more formal. And I understand. I understand what you're saying. It's a really hard line to find.
I agree with boys very much. I think get in trouble with the law is okay. That's okay. I'm just voicing a concern. That's all.
And it's a worthy concern. I agree with it. So Again, yes, I think David said it right when he said you have to use judgment. So, and the same goes with what I'm about, with the last thing I'm about to say. Oh wait, I did want to say one thing that I really like. I said that I had another place where you changed around the order, and I liked it. And that's when you had, was it Doña Rosa? I think it was Rosa, one of the older ladies. You had her begin with Father Picó. She addressed him as Father Picó. And I immediately was going, where's that? I don't see that in the source text. Then I saw that like about 3 lines down, she does address him as Padre. I really liked that you moved it up to the top and put it first. The first place that reminds the readers, or tells the ones who may not have noticed it, that he was a priest. And it tells us that this particular person is speaking to him as one speaks to a priest. And that's a difference that gives a more context to this oral history. We have we see it in this, we see more about the situation and how she's saying what she's saying. And if you had just left it until she said Padre in the 3rd line or the 2nd line, it wouldn't have been as effective. I liked that very much, that you put that in there, used Father Picó, and put it right at the beginning.
I agree with you, Jane. Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent comment.
I really liked that. But in the oral testimonies in general, I often had trouble keeping my place. And I think this particular one, the one that starts out with Father Picó, was the one where it might not have been that one, but I know there was at least one time that I even went through my pages. I had printed out the source text and said, did I drop a page? Did I miss something here? Did I turn something over? Because it wasn't seeming to match up. And I don't mind that you changed the order some. You conflated some sentences that were kind of repetitious. You kind of said it more briefly, but every now and then you left out some expression that I felt took away some of the personality of that individual. I think it was this one where she talked about when she was young, all the adults in Caimito, or at least in her sector, were tío y tía.
Yes.
And I can see leaving that out because it gets complicated, because you'd also have to explain what you mean by it. But I think that should be in there. And I did feel in that middle chapter, chapter 6, like maybe you got a little carried away with your freedom with the oral testimonies and missed some of the personality and of little details like that are important to the oral history. I don't mean that you have to go word for word through every one of them. Just saying, sometimes when you, especially be careful about omissions, because when you omit things, we might be losing something in that oral history that somebody might later on wish was there.
I agree with you, Jane, and I wrote them in also.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether I think that you need to go and rewrite the middle of your thesis, or whether it's just that I would advise you, if you ever got the job of translating this for publication, that maybe you would want to go back and rethink some of those. I don't want to burden you with a whole lot of work to do, and your translations were not wrong. one or two places, I think you misinterpreted something, and I put that in there.
Okay.
So you can judge whether I was right or not. But and choose what you're going to do. But I'd like to see those oral testimonies be just a little bit closer
Okay.
to because this is the last chance for this person to speak.
Yes.
And I love those oral testimonies. And so anyway, but I think you did an excellent job. It's a great thesis. Please don't get, when you start reading the comments, please don't get depressed because I didn't say enough nice things. I wish I had. And I also need to apologize to the entire group. I failed to mute myself when I had to deal with Jehovah's Witnesses at my door. And I should have muted myself, and I realized it too late. So I apologize for that. But okay, but that's good job. And then I'll read my comments and change the ones that you think you should.
I will. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Jane. And of course, Estefania, you know, you'll have to use your judgment. You know, but by the way, you know, once you make all the changes, I'll just look at it very briefly, you know,
Okay.
before you submit it.
Okay.
Well, and if I may say one thing, I'm sorry. Just like Alma, I want to offer that if there's anything you need help with or anything you don't understand in my comments, please get in touch with me. I'd be glad to work with you.
Okay. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right, now, Barbara, I think, is Barbara there? Can we get Barbara here?
Yeah, she's here. Barbara? Yeah, she's coming in.
Oh,
Yes, she's responding.
all right, Estefania, I think you are now going to be escorted out of the room, so to speak. And then we're going to discuss your thesis together, the three of us, in order to determine an evaluation. Okay.
Sounds good.
Estefania and I, or as you prefer to be called, staff, I want to thank you very much for this. Was a great experience for me, you know, to work with you. And I'm always impressed with everything that I've read by Fernando Picó, and I think that you handled this very, very, very well. We'd like to congratulate you, and we have decided that to award this thesis a sobresaliente. So congratulations to you, and congratulations.
Yes, congratulations.
Felicidades.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much. Really excited. Thank you for joining me in this journey, you know, being excellent readers and, you know, providing all of this wonderful feedback for me. I have to admit, it was a hard text to translate, mainly because, you know, my own personal connection to Caimito. I've lived here for 32 years, and I really wanted to preserve these voices. Like you mentioned, Jane, that might be the last time we hear this particular person speak. So I truly have nothing else to say other than I'm grateful to have collaborated with each and every one of you. And thank you for being available during the last weeks of the semester. And I know these weeks are very chaotic. You have other students, other thesis defenses. So I appreciate it. I'm very grateful. So thank you.
It was fun.
Yeah.
It was a joy to work on.
I loved it because Stefania, like I mentioned before, this is my life. These are the years of my life. Okay. You know, this is I was born in 1941, like Father Picó, like Dr. Picó. And many of the things that I read that he wrote about what was going on. Oh, I said, oh my gosh, yeah, that's true. And I remember. And Dr. Picó was very close to Muñoz Marin. I don't know whether you know that.
No, I hadn't realized.
Very close because of this idea of helping those people who are poor, getting them out of that poverty. And you can see that in the writing when he talks about it. And so I'm glad that Jane and I concurred in this idea of Don Luis, because Don Luis
Yes.
is very different from Muñoz Marín. And you
Yes.
know, when Muñoz Marín died, he went by the expressway where I live, and I had my son in my arms. And when I looked, there were all